Open Market is sponsored by AdLib, the self-serve DSP solution making advertising easy. What do the world's largest demand-side platforms have in common? They're effective, but they require large annual contracts and spend minimums. With AdLib, growing agencies get a single platform that connects to every top global DSP with no contracts, no spend minimums, and G2's #1 ranked support. That means access to the entire universe of TV, digital out-of-home, audio, display, video, and native without a hassle and with no blind spots. It's incredibly easy to use, plus it can automate most of the work your team spends hours a day doing manually. Get the most powerful media buying technology without the barriers to entry. Check out AdLib at getadlib.com today. Welcome to Open Market, a podcast about building companies in the advertising industry. I'm Joe Zappa, and he fell out of a coconut tree. It's Eric Franchi.
You're insane. How you doing, Joe?
I'm good. I'm in Seattle. Yeah, I'm in Seattle this week. It's very nice. I had a nice meeting with Joanna Drews, the CEO of Haifa Metrics, which is powering the next generation of TV currencies. So that was great. I'm going to see Greg Kennedy while I'm here, also a longtime ad tech marketing person. And, Seattle is not falling apart, contrary to what, some media narratives will assert about, downtown, whatever. There are problems, but it's very pleasant to be here.
Nice. We're recording this on Wednesday, July 24th. That means, unfortunately, summer is probably half over. How's the summer been? You've been on the road a lot, right?
Yeah, summer's been great. I was in LA last week and Seattle this week. Oh, speaking of which, I went to Universal when I was in LA, and so I have a question for you. This is my new icebreaker. I suspect it may be less relevant to you than to people who are a little bit earlier in their careers and haven't had a nice exit.
I knew this was going to be an old man
here we
joke.
go. Okay,
I knew something was coming. Go ahead.
Okay, so when we went to Universal, my friend and I, there were these people dressed up as toads. You know Toad from like the Mario and Luigi universe?
Vaguely.
Okay, well, you're from Staten Island, so you should know that. And it's embarrassing, frankly, for you that you kind of didn't know who Toad was. Anyway, there are these guys dressed up as like this Mario and Luigi character, and they have to, greet people at the park and whatever. And so I've been asking my friends, all of whom are like, knowledge economy, like 30-something-year-old people, how much would you need to be paid to be a toad for the next 5 years? Like if you're, all these people, they're whatever, a software engineer, or they're like a marketer at like a big tech company or something like that. And I'm like, okay, you can quit your job and you'll be a toad. So very straightforward, but you got to do this gig, which was basically like what cousin Greg did in the pilot of Succession, where he like vomited through the costume's eyes. Is there a number someone could pay you to be a toad, Eric?
I mean, I would just do it for the experience. I think that kind of job is neat. I think you find out a lot about yourself in terms of your ability to probably tolerate heat, tolerate discomfort, tolerate people picking at your shins. I think it's one of those things that probably, if you're a little earlier in your career, it's one of those things you look back and say, wow, I did that. I can do anything. So yeah, I don't know if it's something.
All right. This is a very political answer. All right. Well, I worked a retail job for 1 year when I was in high school. I hated it. And it was, of course, it's like a very good life experience to have because it teaches you to be kind to those people because people are like horrible to retail cashiers. But I certainly never want to go back to any sort of public facing role of that sort. And so I would need a lot of money to be a toad. Like, because I have a nice gig, like I like my job. Now, what struck me about this, so I was like, okay, put 2.5 million per year on my head to make me a toad. Okay, for 5 years, that's approximately what I would need to quit my job, shut down my business, and go be a toad. Now, what struck me as like what I found really interesting was all of my friends, not only were they like, I would be a toad, but they were like, I would take a pay cut to be a toad. And I was like these guys are like software engineers making like, let's say like 400K or whatever. And they're like, I would be a toad for 150K per year. And I'm like, so you would take a 60% pay cut to like put on a costume and work at an amusement park?
Why?
And they would.
What was their reasoning? Just they were just trying to be
I mean,
funny.
what
Or?
I learned, and of course I'm making fun of all of them, I'm like, I mean, I guess you guys are like friggin' like depressed with your like big corporate jobs. I think
Yeah.
it actually, not to be too
Deeper
serious about
meaning.
it. Yeah,
Yeah,
not to be too
there's
serious
deeper
about it,
meaning.
but it like shows, I think, a lot of people are, especially if they work for those big corporations, they're kind of like they don't necessarily love what they're doing, maybe, and they're like, hey, being at an amusement park, chatting with some kids in a Toad costume. Sounds pretty good. Doesn't sound good to me. I really like what I do. So I'm very happy and not eyeing a career change to Toad. But that's what I've been up to. You've been conquering the youth softball universe vicariously through your daughter.
Yeah, yeah. I'm in my dad era. My daughter completed her season at the softball nationals. Her team did very well, and my son is looking at colleges. So it's been a lot of time on the road, but it's been great.
That's awesome. What kind of softball dad are you? Like, are you like red in the face screaming at the refs?
Not at all. Not at all. I'm sitting
Yeah,
there. I cheer. I keep a positive attitude. I'm not the guy.
I wouldn't expect that. I would expect that you'd
Uh,
be very level-headed.
yeah, yeah. No, that's me. And work's been surprisingly busy for summer. We closed our first investment for the fund in July. We'll probably do two more before the summer's out. So there's a
Exciting.
lot going on. Yeah, yeah. There's a lot going on. Anyway, so we're gonna do an Eric and Joe episode today, and we'll call it the boys react. Right?
Yes, we're cribbing that from My First Million. Okay, so it's a marketing grab bag today. The first thing we
Yeah.
wanted to talk about was a tweet I did, and I'll let you tee it up, seeing as you asked me to hold forth on this very important topic.
A couple weeks ago, you posted this. I'll read it. Just closed a good deal with a name brand ad tech company. I do all the marketing and sales for my agency, so I can see all of the touches: Twitter content, event hang, podcast referral, deal. But if this happened at a tech company, it would probably get chalked up to event or referral. Content rarely gets the attribution credit it deserves. I thought this was interesting. So, congrats on
Hmm.
closing a deal. Client to be named later or remain nameless. I think more a little bit how you think about this. Like, I think it's very interesting. Like the B2B funnel and content, according to this tweet, is a driver of it, but very hard to attribute. So just riff on this thing because I thought it was really interesting.
So, as I mentioned in the tweet, I do all the marketing and sales for my agency. So, I have the rare privilege of being able to see the entire funnel, like any marketing touch point I witness personally and drive, and then I can see it all the way through to the sale. So, I see like the long and winding journey, right? From like whatever the first touch is to when someone becomes a client of my agency. But this is often invisible to companies, especially larger companies, because so many different people are touching the prospect. And so it's difficult to understand everything that went into attribution, which is, of course, why our industry has come up with multi-touch attribution. But as we know, like that's much more complicated in practice, and it like works better for things like paid advertising where you can like register a click and whatever. So this particular deal that I was talking about in the tweet, I won't name the company, but it's a well-known DSP. And you were actually the impetus for this. And
Oh,
ultimately, this was someone you referred to me. You know the CEO and you referred them to me. But like to really understand how this came together, you would have to go through like all the way back to August of last year when I started posting on Twitter regularly because this deal, which ultimately like you referred to me, doesn't happen if we don't know each other. And we know each other because I started tweeting regularly. It was like a conscious decision. I'd been doing LinkedIn for over a year and I was like, let me try to add Twitter as a marketing channel. So I started creating content daily on Twitter. Then you noticed it. You eventually reached out to me. Like we met in person in New York. We keep interacting on Twitter. So it's like, if you want to look at it this way, like I'm keeping you warm, right? We're building a relationship. Then I went to Possible in Miami, where you also were, and we hung out for a bit. And when I was there, you were like, what if we did a podcast, which became this podcast? And then, we start doing this together, get to know each other better. Ultimately, you end up referring the CEO to me, and then I end up doing work with them, right? So it's like many deals work this way. So my guess would be that in the average tech company, this would get chalked up to either referral, which was really the last touch, right? Or maybe like event, right? Where it's like it came out of a conversation at an event. But often content is touching the prospect before the event hang. Like how do you end up hanging out with someone at an event? Often it's because you were talking to them online before, whether it's in Slack, Twitter, LinkedIn, whatever it is. And then you're keeping them warm afterward because a lot of the time you meet someone at an event and you have a good conversation, but then they disappear. Whereas if you're on LinkedIn or Twitter daily and interacting with them in that sphere, they're going to remember you. You'll be top of mind and you're more likely to get a referral out of them. So that was just my point about how content often plays a bigger role in sourcing deals than it gets credit for.
How do you convince your clients of this? Absent like, a very simple, clean case study like the one you just walked through.
I mean, I think storytelling is a lot of it. Like so much of doing effective marketing is internal comms, like in-house at a company. Like it's explaining this stuff to your CEO or whoever's signing the checks. Or if you're in an agency, it's explaining this to clients and prospects. I think one underused and sort of like old school way to do this is when you do close deals as a B2B company, like, are you doing a little survey to find out how they heard of you or all the places they may have like interacted with you? Or are you just like at least asking and sort of making a note of it? This is why tech companies love downloadable assets, right? Like if it's a webinar or it's a white paper, like everyone who has downloaded something from you, you have them in a spreadsheet or whatever, so that then when you close people, you can look back at those downloads and be like, is there overlap here? So that's a way that marketing departments can say, okay, we definitely influence this deal. You could feasibly do the same thing with social. Like you could be looking at everyone who has engaged with your, like once you do the deal, okay, go back. Did they engage with us on LinkedIn or Twitter? And I would say that if you're the type of CEO who really wants to be analyzing your marketing in that way, like you need the numbers to believe it's working, then you should absolutely do that, right? Every deal you close, you should be cross verifying which one of our marketing efforts touch them. And it's probably only through that kind of effort that you're going to get quantitative evidence because there are tools, but I think it's messy enough that there's no one tool that's going to perfectly capture B2B marketing attribution.
Got it. Super interesting. So you got to believe.
Yeah, I mean that's one way to put it, right? I do think that's true. I think that the people who succeed most with marketing are the people who are just in on it and who understand like the point of marketing is to build my reputation and relationships. If I'm getting in front of influencers like you and my customers themselves, that is going to lead to more deals either in the form of those people becoming my customers or them influencing people who become my customers. I certainly believe that that's what I do and that's what I try to help my clients do. But if you won't just believe it or you're not going to be satisfied with leading indicators like people engaging on social, then you need to go verify through these sort of DIY methods.
Makes sense. Okay, cool. Google, cookies, they're not going away.
Yes, we record these usually a couple weeks before, so you'll be hearing this a couple weeks from now. Obviously, it'll still be relevant. We've been talking about cookies for like 4 years now. I saw a lot of tweets that were like, okay, Google is maybe not killing cookies now. Like marketing departments are in shambles. Like, how are they? They're going to have to rush to like redo all of the cookie list messaging and whatever. I don't think that's true at all, actually. I think that cookies are like, they're only on Chrome, right? Like Apple killed them years ago. Other browsers killed them. They're still probably going to be downgraded. Like Google's message now is that they're going to give the user choice. So what remains to be seen is obviously how they'll present that choice. Because if it's like an Apple app tracking transparency type thing, 80% of third-party cookies could go away, right? So like all of the cookieless messaging to me is still relevant. And even more to the point, cookieless was always like a weirdly particular signifier for privacy changes. They're just privacy changes more generally, right? GDPR, various US states, what Apple's doing. So this has never just been a Google third-party cookie problem. For publishers and advertisers, like dealing with signal loss is still going to be top of mind. So I think that from a marketing standpoint, actually not that much changes. You can still use cookieless, and beyond that, you should be talking about privacy changes. But including and beyond marketing, what was your reaction to the news, Eric?
So the first was I'm trying to like analyze and critique Google's handling of this because it's been bad, right? Like, will they, won't they, multiple times over the course of years. And then finally, just like dropping a post and then with some, sort of kind of quasi chief audience officers, having their individual voices on LinkedIn and X, just saying, hey, here's the update. There's limitations on what the largest company in advertising can do. So I guess just like dropping a blog post is it. And I also think that it's probably, expected that they are opaque in terms of what this opt-in, opt-out mechanism is going to be. Because I don't think they've figured it out yet. I think that was just a decision, and that's going to remain to be seen. So I think it's hard to like critique. It's A, how do you critique Google's handling of this? So dropping a blog post is basically what they do. That was thought A. Thought B was, it's like, how did the ecosystem react? Like in a sea of posts on X, posts on LinkedIn, there's a lot of sameness. So, like I was trying to figure out, again, sort of kind of flash question to both of us. Now it's 2 days later. Like, who do you remember and who had the best or most memorable POV on this thing? The first was Ari's. Ari basically tweeted something to the effect of, "Oh my God, I've lived and breathed this for the past 5 years. What am I going to do with myself?" So, I think the humor angle is number one. Number two was, Jeff Green and other execs at TTV just, doing probably a well-deserved victory lap in different ways. And then, number three, again, it's probably because I'm particularly attuned to this because they're a portfolio company. I actually thought that Mathieu from ID5 had, I think, a very good, balanced, again, company blog that, spelled out like why basically, things are staying the course. And also, I think he pointed out a few of the things that you said there. But then it was a lot of people just, saying a lot of the same stuff. Do you remember any reactions before we go into, kind of how companies might, use this or not use this in GTM?
I want to comment on, I think that's great. I want to comment on something a little different, which is I think we learned like a sort of a PR lesson from this whole like years long saga, which is like the posture Google has adopted has sort of been one of like open uncertainty about this.
Yeah.
And like
Oof.
we're taking feedback and we're gonna like react and whatever. And I think they do deserve a little credit for finally acting on that feedback in the sense that like they've been listening for 4 years. I believe them on that. And they've been hearing everyone say this is going to be a freaking disaster. And they finally said, okay, you guys are right. We're going to concede a little ground on this. We're not going to just straight up kill cookies. And I think that's good. But I think we've seen, I'm maybe being a little bit hyperbolic about this, but I don't think you get like basically any credit for the we're listening posture. And it's funny, it makes me think of from to mention Succession again. There's like Greg and Tom go to the like Davos stand-in the show, and they have like an Alexa listening device, the company, and it turns out it's actually listening to people. And like their like new company slogan is like "We hear you." And so then they can't do it because their device is actually listening to people, which is like a very media ad tech type example. But basically, the show is lampooning this idea of like, we hear you, like a big corporation being like, we're listening to you or whatever, right? And I think that's rightfully lampooned. I don't think it works as like a PR disposition because you don't get credit for it, and it's better off to just be like do what Apple does and just be like, this is what we're doing, clear, decisive, it's going to happen. This is how you can prepare for it. Sorry, we're not taking notes. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that's right. But also, again, this was such a weird one, right? Because Google's one of the two largest digital ad companies. It's also the largest browser or,
Hmm.
under the umbrella. This is a fundamental technology that they don't own. I guess they could have gone the Apple route. There's no reason why they couldn't have done it. And perhaps in retrospect, that would have been the right way to do this, irrespective of what the change would have been. How should CEOs and senior leaders be using this moment? Maybe they're not an alternative ID company but they're in just digital ads. They're in ad tech. They're in the middle of this stuff, and it affects everybody. Do you immediately give your perspective? Do you wait? And maybe you've kind of counseled some of your clients on this. Like in a moment like this, how what's the right way to react?
I think privacy has been such a top of mind topic in the industry for years. So every company should have an understanding of where they stand on it and how it relates to their business. And you should have sort of an internal messaging doc that everyone in the company can look at that indicates like what are the top issues in the industry and what is our like house perspective on them, so that when news breaks like this, you immediately know what are the general like guidelines of what our response to this would be. And then whoever is the chief evangelist for the company, whether it's the CEO or someone else, should be talking to, either if it's a small company, they should like look at that and get out there and share their perspective, or they should be working with the marketing agency or marketing team to figure out how they want to message on it and get out there. An important thing to understand about this is like an undifferentiated perspective, which is I think partially what you're getting at, like really avails you nothing. Like if you're just going to be part of the chorus of people who are going to be like, yeah, like Google should have figured this out sooner. And like it's kind of a bummer, but also cookies are still going away. So you have to be prepared. Like that doesn't help because no one's going to remember that. So what's the point? Another big point I would make about it is that I think often non-marketing people underestimate how fast these things move and how fast you can be left behind. So like you need to respond. If you want to be quoted in like a journalist story about this, they're getting that up like an hour or two after this news breaks. So obviously there will be following days coverage, but if you want to be part of like the immediate news cycle, you need to be hitting up reporters immediately. A third thing I'll add tactically when these sorts of news developments break is a few reporters were trashing PR people in the wake of this news for sending around canned quotes. This is a common thing that some PR agencies will do where they'll basically like they'll come up with a quote for their client and then they'll like spam it to like 10 different outlets. Yeah, don't do that because journalists are only going to run something generally if it's exclusive. So if it's not exclusive and it also seems like undifferentiated and isn't really adding any value, you're not doing anything to advance your position with the journalist. You're just like hurting yourself and your client.
Great advice. Let's move on. You had something here on the docket. What
Yeah.
can founders do early on from a marketing perspective?
Yeah, I get that question all the time because there are obviously like we're in a sector of the tech industry. There are a lot of early stage startups, and I often will talk to CEO founders who just aren't ready to bring on a marketing resource like me or really anyone else full time or agency. And so they just want to know like right now, what can I do when they have like little to no marketing budget? One is to start building an audience. So people are like, okay, how do I do that? It's formidable. I don't have the time, yada, yada. What I say is just like when you're building a company, you're constantly explaining things about the ecosystem and the problems you solve to potential investors, colleagues, clients, prospects, partners, employees. When you find yourself explaining those things, like that is what thought leadership is, right? So just start documenting it. And if you can, try to get in the habit of anytime you're explaining something, like let's say you're building a CTV advertising company. Anytime you're explaining something about CTV to someone that you think could be relevant to more than just that individual person, get in the habit of putting it out, right? Like you just said it verbally because people be like, I don't know what to write or writing is scary. Well, you just said it verbally. So literally just write down what you said and put it out on LinkedIn or Twitter. It doesn't have to be a masterpiece. You'll be lucky if people scrutinize it, right? Most things just go unnoticed. So get in the habit of starting to build an audience and creating content. That's the first thing. Second thing would be building sales collateral. So anytime you have a win with a client, you want to document that, right? So that could be like a case study, like start creating those as you go. Again, like more advanced companies, like I know like the trade desk, for example, has like a person who just like does case studies, right? Because they're like a really big public ad tech company. But early on, they really don't have to be fancy or like masterful. It's just the classic like problem, solution, results framework. And like a CEO, like as they work with clients, can just like do that in like 30 minutes and put it on the website, right? So you want to be creating sales collateral, documenting wins, also debunking objections, right? So in as you're in your sales process, you're going to get like the same questions over and over. So start creating like an FAQ list where you answer that so that after a sales call, you can just shoot it to someone and, resolve any objections they may have. Another thing early stage founders can do is start building relationships with journalists. So as you're consuming the trade press, you're going to see people write articles and you're going to think, oh, they're missing this angle that I know a lot about. Shoot them an email and just say, hey, love the story. I think there's another aspect of this that maybe you haven't covered yet. And this is what it is. Don't expect things. Don't be transactional. Just build the relationship like you would with anyone else by providing value and asking for nothing in return. And like, this is how you lay the foundation for having a company that is widely covered. That makes sense to you?
You had a fourth on the docket here.
Oh, yeah. So obviously events like content, events, PR, basically like the three pillars of ad tech marketing tactically. Obviously, like early on, it's not going to be worth it to like go to Cannes and like get a yacht or even to like sponsor, like buy one of those like $20,000 sponsorships for like an ad exchanger event. But you can start doing events in a much cheaper fashion. Like you basically just show up, you buy the cheapest ticket or cough, cough, don't buy a ticket and you just have meetings, right? Like just go to the venue, try to set up meetings. And by the way, you know what makes setting up like a dozen interesting meetings before a big event much easier is doing that first thing of creating content. Because as we talked about earlier with the attribution example, if you're talking to people daily and just providing value and having human conversations, it's much easier than when you're going to the event to get meetings booked. Like when I went to Possible in April, I had like 15 meetings that were all just people I had met via LinkedIn and Twitter.
I would say on that, another thing, once they reach a certain point, doing their own events. And again, these could be super small. This could just be company plus key advisors and customers, just getting everybody together, for, some half day meetings and then happy hour and stuff like that. You can do that, I think, at a very reasonable budget. And it starts to set a real foundation and building your community, building your ecosystem accordingly. So I love that. What do you think about trying to stand out from the crowd beyond posting on X and LinkedIn, right? Because increasingly, like there's other places to post. There's like TikTok. There's other formats, right? So post videos on LinkedIn, post, videos on X, create more educational, materials or market maps. Like, what do you think about that in terms of how you advise early stage founders? Is it just like, hey, you got to wait until you're ready for it? Or are you like a natural, person that's good on video? What is there any sort of kind of blueprint for that you're making recommendations on?
I think marketing for early stage founders is kind of like weight loss or fitness. It's like do whatever you're actually going to do. Like the hardest thing here is consistency and sticking with it. So if you're a video person and you're like, I'm just going to turn on the camera and like do 2 minutes on CTV, like Paul Gubbins is an excellent example of someone who does that well, then do that. That's great. And post it to Twitter and LinkedIn and wherever else. If you are like me and you're more of a writer, then write stuff. But yeah, like the biggest hurdle early stage founders are going to face with marketing is just not making the time for it and not doing it. So whatever is going to be the path of least resistance to you being consistent is what I would want you to do. And by the way, when you do that, not only do I think you'll see returns from it in the immediate term, but you will set up your first marketing hire to be vastly more successful, whether that's an agency or an internal person, because it's way easier for a professional marketer to be effective when you already have a little goodwill going with the ecosystem than if they have to try to take someone who has no market penetration and make them a known entity.
Okay, so next one on the docket is the complete opposite. What should you be getting out of a 20-person marketing team? What in the world should you be getting out of a 20-person marketing team, Joe?
I mean, so much, and I think so much more than a lot of companies with large marketing teams do get out of them. And I think this is not the fault of any one person. This is just like how all bureaucracy functions, right? It's like you start, and it applies to any department, right? Like you start building a team and it's like, well, we need this person to do this and that and that. And it's like, I think sometimes it's easy to lose sight of the core thing, which is like, are we part of the conversation? Are we building our reputation and relationships? are we getting in front of people with a differentiated message that captures their attention and that galvanizes our customers and the people who influence them? If I were a CMO, and I of course talk to CMOs all the time, like heading up a 20-person unit, like I feel like I would want that like on my office wall, just like, are we building our reputation and relationships? Are we part of the conversation? And I would want to make sure that our entire team is contributing to that concretely. And then it's also a question of staying up with the tactics that are working nowadays. So this is the vantage point from which I see things. So I'm biased, but like content and comms, right? Like so many of the large ad tech companies are like absent from the daily conversation that's happening among content creators and influencers on social channels. Like to me, it's unacceptable to have a 20-person ad tech marketing team and not be at the forefront of that conversation. Now, I fully recognize like it's one part of the marketing equation and there's a lot of other stuff going on, but it's a huge part of building your reputation and relationships. So like if you have 20 people, like you got to have one person internally or externally whose job is to like insert you into that conversation and make sure that like people like you and me who are running our mouths to like an ad tech audience are thinking about you and talking about you. So that's just like one glaring hole that I see in a lot of ad tech marketing programs. And whether you hire someone internally or externally, like I would like to see more companies take advantage of that opportunity.
Why do you think that hole exists?
I think partially it's just like an outmoded approach to marketing and it's not recognizing like that when you have that 20-person team, like, I mean, I would just have one person whose entire job is this. Like, I'd be like, you're our social evangelist. Like, your job is to be out there arguing on our behalf and also to help the executives in the company have a voice. So, you're going to do some of your own content and you would also like help the CEO and someone else get out there. So I think it's partially that. It's just like an outmoded view of things. And then the other thing I think it is like people are scared to say the wrong thing. And you hear this from like, this needs to come from the top, like the CEO, ideally. And if not, like the CMO, if you have one, or the VP of marketing, they need to create a culture that encourages everyone in the company to be out in public evangelizing the organization. Because otherwise, if you don't have that culture, they know they're not going to be fired for not being out there because no one's out there. So that's just the norm. But they're probably scared. Like, what if I say the wrong thing or I'm off message? Then I could face, adverse consequences. And if I were the CMO of a company with, a 20+ person marketing team, I would be screaming from the rooftops, like, I want to see each and every one of you out there, like advancing our position in the market and amplifying our message. Like, don't be afraid of saying the wrong thing because the chances that you're going to say something that have an adverse impact on the company are like way lower than most people think. Like, if these people are on your team, you presumably have some faith in them. Like, they know the company, they know what you stand for, etc. I would loose them on the market and be like, get out there and be confident and understand that this is part of your role and you will be rewarded for doing this.
Yeah, that makes sense. Especially what you said about, this just being companies being stuck in old ways or outmoded. Like, I see a lot of board decks, and oftentimes marketing has a slide or slides in the board deck. And unless there was like something very important and special, like a rebranding or like a website redesign or like, something that's like really a highlight for the marketing organization, oftentimes it's like quantifiable KPIs that, I think are like heavily influenced by what you just walked through, probably because it's quantifiable. That's all it's pointed to, right? So it's like this number of articles, we attended these events, we got this number of leads from this activity, right? Like all of these, what you would probably consider like kind of like lower funnel activities are what's highlighted. And I think that drives the action, right? Which is like, we're going to attend a lot of events. We're going to host a lot of events. We're going to pitch a lot of reporters, right? With ignoring what might be like the key driver of it all, which is like brand and reputation and, all that stuff. And it's interesting because this is like a theme through a bunch of the stuff that we've talked about both today on this pod and, increasingly like, on multiple pods, which is, I think folks are stuck in old ways, focused on like the tactics, oriented towards KPIs that aren't necessarily even the right KPIs. And CEOs and those who are, driving towards these things don't know better.
Yeah, it's like how many MQLs are we driving with our like event sponsorship or our white papers or whatever? And like the next time you're in one of those meetings, Eric, I know you're going to stop the CEO during the marketing section and just be like, "How are the vibes?" Like that's what I care about. Like, are we building our reputation and relationships? Like an example of a company that's doing an amazing job at B2B marketing is Beehive. They are just like they're everywhere. Their CEO is obviously doing the chief evangelist on the chief audience model, where like he has his own newsletter that's super popular and he's like very active on social and is kind of creating like a cult of personality around the company, which is awesome. I often make the point that like if you follow Beehive, if you're like aware of them, you may know that like they're constantly cranking out new features. So like you could see that and be like, oh, well, they're winning because of product, right? Like their product is good and it helps you win more than MailChimp does. Yeah, but you only know that they're constantly releasing new features because Tyler Denk, the CEO, has an audience and he's constantly telling you they have new features, right? So like the product and the marketing advantage there are reinforcing each other and they're indissociable. So
give me one other example. Put Beehive aside. They're doing extremely well. What's another company that comes to mind that's executing in that type of way in B2B?
well, I would think of like Hampton
hard, right?
comes to mind. Yeah, no, it's hard. I mean, it's like, yeah, we've obviously talked about the My First Million guys and like Sam Parr getting Hampton off the ground so fast. So that's kind of like quasi B2B. Yeah, I think that it is extremely hard and almost no one in ad tech does it. Actually, I saw someone from Beehive like talking, one of their commercial people talking about basically the vibes they're generating. And I commented like, you guys are doing an excellent job at marketing. A bunch of you are out there. You're very visible. They have like the little bee, what is it? The bee emoji like next to their names on Twitter and like everyone can see that. And like there's almost no one in our industry who's doing that. I will say, like, as we've discussed before, there are companies that will have like one person who is out there. Like I think of like Judd Spencer for the trade desk. Like you see him out there. Lauren from InfoSum. We talked about Paul Gubbins. So like we know there are individuals who do this well, but any company, to go back to the start of this like part of the conversation, if you have a 10, 20, or 30 person marketing team, you have a tremendous advantage in ad tech. Like there just aren't that many ad tech companies that are making that kind of investment in marketing. At least 5 of those people should be on Twitter and LinkedIn, and they should have a dumb little emoji next to their name that signifies what company they're from. And you can take over the conversation. Like, because it's such a freaking desert. Like, you can make a huge, like I said, I got on Twitter in August of last year. So it hasn't even been a full 12 months. And like it has made a tremendous impact on my name ID reputation and like the fate of my company. And absolutely. And that's me as like a solo founder where I'm also across fulfillment. Like companies with large marketing teams can make a tremendous impact on this. And they should be investing more in it.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. Choose the emoji. I mean, that just seems to be such a fun, low risk, brand differentiator. Like just go for it. Be thoughtful about it, right? Like, you're not going to be able to have, a B, but like it's a no-brainer. And maybe it's not choose the emoji. Maybe it's something more creative, more, different that we're not thinking about. But it's such a clear no-brainer opportunity.
I think that's a good note to end on.
Absolutely. All right. Well, it's a pleasure. As always, folks, if you like this stuff, please smash that subscribe button, leave a comment, leave a like, tweet at Joe. He responds. I'm a little bit less reliable, but I read everything. And we'll see you next week.
Yeah, NBC Universal, 12.5 million, 5-year contract on my head to be a toad. I'll be the best toad you've ever seen. I'm going to whip everyone into shape. Those kids will have never had a better experience at a frickin' amusement park in the history of North American amusement parks. 12.5. My DMs are open.
That was your Hulk Hogan moment. You did it. You kept your shirt on. Good job, Jeff. All right, we'll see you, everybody.
Bye, guys.